Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, October 2nd, 2018. Time for yet another show, and I guess time for, well, I guess a hell of a lot more about Brett Kavanaugh as well. Things continue to get, or the crap piles higher, I suppose. And, well, it's not getting any better for him, that's for sure. All right. We'll see if we can round up the latest of the problems he may or may not have to deal with, depending on whether or not the Republicans in Congress care, or whether it's another who cares story, or goalpost moving, as they like to say, when Democrats change their views of things. We are now on to the who cares whether he lied, who cares whether he was covering things up, who cares whether he was in a bar fight, who cares whether he was or wasn't 21 at the time that he was drinking in this bar fight. Well, I think he might have snuck in on a technicality, it is now pointed out to me, where they may have grandfathered him in. They changed the drinking age in Connecticut to 21 just, I guess, about a month or so before he was involved in this bar fight. But I guess he was 20 already, and the grandfathering allowed for that. So fantastic. He's not one for, legal loopholes for most other people, I'm pretty sure. But hey, you may get by on a technicality. How he ended up being not arrested in this incident, I have no idea, but you never know how these things go. It's a tough time to be policing in New Haven, I'm sure. All right, that's one of the big stories. I guess there's a couple of them. Two developments on the Kavanaugh front. I guess we'll get through one after the other. The more, I don't know, I guess actually the more sensational of the two is, or the more consequential of the two will be second, in what appears to be Kavanaugh's behind-the-scenes manipulation of the probing of witnesses with respect to some of his sexual assaults. That's going to be, I think, the more consequential of the two. The other one looked a little splashy for a little while, and certainly doesn't reflect well on his behavior. But hey, it's been so long. Kavanaugh was questioned by police after a bar fight in 1985, a 20-year-old bar fight. The bar fight itself is considerably older than that. He was 20 at the time, because that's what you do going into bars. I guess he was legal, or technically speaking, so I suppose that explains it. Although I thought that might have explained why there was a discrepancy as between a couple of the reports with respect to whether it was beer that Brett Kavanaugh threw in the face of the other patron at the bar or ice. I thought perhaps they had described it to the police as ice because, well, he wasn't supposed to be in possession of a beer at the time. But now he's just a wastrel, is all. Throwing beer, fine, drinkable beer away at the in furtherance of provoking a bar fight. And what a stupid bar fight it is, too. I guess we'll give you the details of that in this New York Times article. As an undergraduate student at Yale, Brett Kavanaugh was involved in an altercation at a local bar, during which he was accused of throwing ice, it says here, on another patron, according to police reports. Of course, ice, not super comfortable to have thrown in your face. And I will remind you that down in Florida in the last couple of years or so, 2015 maybe, there was the cop, off-duty cop, who shot and killed another man in a movie theater for throwing popcorn at him, which is considerably softer than most ice. But hey, maybe it was crushed ice, and so it wasn't so damaging. You never know. But popcorn put this off-duty cop in fear for his life, apparently, and he shot and killed the guy who threw the popcorn at him. So, it can be rather dangerous when you want it to be. The incident, which occurred in September of 1985 during Mr. Kavanaugh's junior year, and right at the beginning of his junior year at that, resulted in Mr. Kavanaugh and four other men being questioned by the New Haven Police Department. Mr. Kavanaugh was not arrested, but the police report stated that a 21-year-old man accused Mr. Kavanaugh of throwing ice on him for some unknown reason And it is kind of weird, isn't it? Did you hear the story last night? I don't know if is it described in this article? Apparently, the word is that they had just gone to it's down here later on. I mean, I guess we might as well give the background details and then get to the stupidness of the story. A witness to the fight said that Chris Dudley, a Yale basketball player who was friends with Mr. Kavanaugh, then threw a glass that hit the man in the ear, according to the police report, which was obtained by the New York Times. That's a great way of fighting, by the way, throwing glasses at other people's heads. It's very manly, and I guess maybe that was the Deke way at the time. I don't know whether Chris Dudley was a Deke or not, but has been pointed out that Donald Trump seems to have a weird affinity for people who get involved in bar fights that include smashing glass and lacerating the faces of their opponents, as Felix Sater did in his own bar fight. But we don't know when that was or whether Felix Sater was of age at the time. I'm sure he was. The report said that the victim, Dom Cozzolino, I'm guessing, Cozzolino, was bleeding from the right ear and was treated at a hospital. A detective was notified of the incident at 1:20 a.m., the best time for bar fights. Mr. Dudley denied the accusation, according to the report. For his part, speaking to the officers, Mr. Kavanaugh did not want to say if he threw the ice or not. The police report said, that's nice. I would like to not say anything. The report referred, it's supposedly you're right, but maybe it isn't anymore. We'll see. In the future, we'll hear from Kavanaugh about whether or not you can take the fifth. The report referred to the altercation, which occurred at a bar called Demery's, as an assault. It did not say whether anyone was arrested, and there's no indication that charges were filed. It's lightly redacted, this thing. I'm not certain what they have redacted there, perhaps date of birth, perhaps address, whatever. And there are photocopies, barely legible, really, of the police reports embedded in here. And let's see. They they're making notes about what kind of glass it was here. Let's see. Mr. Colisso, I can't quite read the handwriting here, but it does say someone saw a tall gentleman, later identified as Mr. Dudley, throw a tall glass. How appropriate. A Collins glass. They helpfully identify it that way. And let's see. And it hit Mr. Colisso in the ear, or Mr. Cozzolino in the ear. You'll never guess how the fight started unless, of course, you've already heard the story. The White House, though, did not immediately respond to requests for comment on Monday. Mr. Dudley didn't respond to phone or email messages reached by texts. Mr. Cozzolino declined to comment as well. The outlines of the incident were first referred to in a statement issued on Sunday by Chad Luddington, which I still can't believe is a real name, one of Kavanaugh's college classmates and a member of the Yale basketball team. So he would have, of course, known Mr. Dudley as well. On one of the last occasions I purposely socialized with Brett, I witnessed him respond to a semi-hostile remark, not by diffusing the situation as a person with a judicial demeanor or judicial temperament might have done, but by throwing his beer in the man's face, Mr. Luddington said in a statement. Mr. Luddington, a professor at North Carolina State University, said he came forward because he believed Judge Kavanaugh had mischaracterized the extent of his drinking at Yale, and we believe that he has. But he said beer, and the other guy said ice, so liar. I guess that's where we stand now. Mr. Luddington said that he had been in touch with the FBI. He said that the altercation happened, this is the funny part, after a UB40 concert on September 25th, when he and a group of people went to Demery's and were drinking pints. How English of you. Or Irish, I suppose. At one point, they were sitting near a man who they thought resembled Ali Campbell, the lead singer of UB40. I have no idea. I remember UB40 barely. I know who they are. Wouldn't be able to tell you who the lead singer was. And of course, sure, the lead singer would absolutely be at Demery's with the rest of them. Anyway, they're trying to figure out if it's him, said Mr. Luddington. When the man noticed Mr. Luddington, Mr. Kavanaugh, and the others looking at him, he objected and told them to stop it, adding an expletive. Mr. Luddington said. Mr. Kavanaugh cursed, he said, and then threw his beer at the guy. The guy swung at Brett, Mr. Luddington continued. At that point, Mr. Dudley took his beer and smashed it into the head of the guy, who by now had Brett in an embrace. I don't think it was really what we would normally describe as an embrace, but they were tangled up. I then tried to pull Chris, I guess Dudley, back, and a bunch of other guys tried to pull the other guy back. I don't know what Brett was doing in the melee, but there was blood, there was glass, there was beer, there was someone shouting. I guess it was ice. And then the police showed up. Demery's, which was closed in 1994, was a well-known bar that served big slices of pizza and cheap beer, especially after 9 p.m. Well, that's a good formula. It drew a crowd that included older Yaleys and younger ones with good fake IDs, according to thepolitic.org. Good fake IDs. Where could you get such a thing? Mr. Dudley, who after Yale went on to the NBA and was the Republican nominee for governor of Oregon in 2010, has spoken out in support of Judge Kavanaugh's Supreme Court nomination and disputed reports that he drank excessively. Several Yale classmates, including a former roommate and Mr. Ludington, have described Kavanaugh as sometimes aggressive when he was drinking, i.e., hey, you aren't the lead singer of UB40? Then I will effing kill you. Let's all have a bar fight and send somebody to the hospital and maybe possibly get arrested. But they didn't get arrested, surprisingly enough. All right, let's see. I have a note has come in here. Did I see Greg send me something here? Let's check it out. Armando, is that right? Did you send me this one? Okay, 9, 10. Yeah, look at this. What do we have here? Let's take a quick look. Adam Serwer's tweet. What do we have? Why Brett Kavanaugh should, we'll have to click through, why Brett Kavanaugh should be confirmed to the Supreme Court even if he's guilty. From the Federalist. What do you know? The Federalist Society coming to the defense of their Federalist Society guy. And not that they are particularly Federalist in their outlook. Oh, look, people are excerpting this thing. I'm not going to go search this out. The Federalist is, of course, a ridiculous publication. One of the worst. Let's see what people are saying about it. Wendy Siegelman said, had to Google to see if this was real. Apologies for doubting you, Adam. And she says, let's see. Oh, some more replies here. I was just going to check to make sure this wasn't something from The Onion. I have no words. Here's Darth saying, aren't they spreading the hypnosis conspiracy now, Adam? Yeah, that's another good one that's out there. Pirro on Fox News started that, as far as I can tell, says another tweeter in the thread. Yes, in case you hadn't heard that one, Janine Pirro went on Fox News to say that Christine Blasey Ford's recollections of the sexual assault were likely as a result of her own self-hypnosis, having talked herself into the fact that this had happened. Armando says he was satirically tweeting that this was now the new GOP position, but you're not kidding. It's really true. Satire is dead, and I would say Brett Kavanaugh killed them in a drunken rage, and I think it's in the newspapers. Here's another excerpt that our own Jen Hayden, Scout Finch, has picked up on. Quote, finally, Kavanaugh's judicial opinions on so-called women's issues, which women's issues like abortion, contraception, etc., are already widely known. The veracity of Ford's allegation has no implication for how Kavanaugh would rule on Roe v. Wade. So-called women's issues. She says, I just can't. Well, it's pretty amazing. Now, I guess they have previously done this. Looks like we have one tweeter here in the thread with a screen grab of what looks to be the same type font. So maybe it's one of their previous, the Federalist headlines. Why Alabamians should vote for Roy Moore. It's really getting pretty amazing over there at the Federalist. It's a garbage publication. So speaking of The Onion, though, let me keep this thing open so I can share it with the rest of you. I'm not going to retweet it necessarily. But speaking of The Onion, that came up the other day. Oh, why is this? I don't want that to open. I want to go over here to Pocket and try and find this thing. And let's see. The Onion had a headline the other day that I grabbed because, as people like to say, not The Onion, when they find something ridiculous that basically could or should, or maybe sometimes was, an Onion headline, could or should have been, and sometimes was an Onion headline in the past, now come true. And let's see, where was this thing? I know I had it relatively handy just the other day. Here we are. Something we discussed on the program the other day. Now it's an Onion headline, but not for long. Kavanaugh claims, this is the Onion, Kavanaugh claims he never committed sexual assault, as it will be defined after future Supreme Court case. And you see the Onion getting out ahead of things and picking up on our themes from here on the show. And here's the fake article. Speaking before the Senate Judiciary Committee, Brett Kavanaugh defended himself against accusations of misconduct Thursday, with claims that he never committed sexual assault, as it will come to be defined in a future Supreme Court case. The allegations that I assaulted these women are categorically untrue, based on the 2019 case of Sandberg v. Jones, which will establish that only penetrative sex can be classified as assault, and then only in cases with up to 4 eyewitnesses, said Kavanaugh, arguing that the upcoming 5-4 decision, in which he will write the majority opinion, would completely exonerate him. Admittedly, there are things from my past that cause me to cringe, but I've never done anything that, oh dear, I have to get rid of a pop-up first. I've never done anything that could be considered illegal based on this landmark ruling that will come up in the next few months. Furthermore, these accusations are largely irrelevant, as they fall significantly outside the soon-to-be-established statute of limitations of 2 weeks following an alleged incident. Kavanaugh added that this whole ordeal had been extremely trying for him and his family, and he looked forward to pursuing legal action against Christine Blasey Ford for violating forthcoming laws against defaming a federal judge. Could happen. Is it far-fetched? Some of it. Is it impossible to do? Is it impossible to do at all? No, it's not. Is it impossible to envision? Well, you might have trouble with it, but in a very serious way, that's basically the power that you're granting to Brett Kavanaugh. Be careful who you give it to. That's all I'm saying. All right, let's see. Oh, well, all of this Onion reading has apparently exhausted the cooling system on the laptop running the reader programs here. So we'll see if we can't give this a little bit of additional ventilation and relief in order to reduce that weird background noise. That's something we haven't been able to eliminate in all of our technical updates. Anyway, let's see. Much more out there. The more damaging Kavanaugh revelation, I think, comes, well, let's see. I've got a couple of different reports on it. And I guess the most thorough is likely, well, I don't know. I'm not certain whether this is the most thorough. But I have one here from Jonathan Chait at New York Magazine. And I'm sure there are more. And this just happens to be one that I grabbed. Kavanaugh knew about the Ramirez allegation much earlier than he says. This seems to be problematic. During Brett Kavanaugh's Senate testimony last week, Orrin Hatch asked the prospective Supreme Court Justice, "When did you first hear of Ms. Ramirez's allegations against you?" Kavanaugh replied, in the period since then, the New Yorker story. Hatch was referring to Deborah Ramirez's charge that Kavanaugh humiliated her by, of course, exposing himself to her while he was intoxicated. And there's slightly more colorful description of that in the piece, but you get the idea. Kavanaugh appeared to be saying he heard of the charges after they appeared in the New Yorker in September. NBC reports that this, like many things Kavanaugh said in his testimony, is false. Kavanaugh's friends gathered testimony attempting to refute Ramirez's allegations weeks before the New Yorker's story was published. This is troubling. Some of the witnesses were contacted by people working on Kavanaugh's behalf as early as July, according to text messages one witness has shared with the FBI. What we're talking about here, then, is him answering Senator Hatch's question, when did you first hear about this Ramirez allegation? And the answer is basically in the last couple of days, when in fact he was apparently helping coordinate an effort behind the scenes to keep that story and those allegations under wraps as early as July, i.e. as soon as he was nominated. That is rather troubling, isn't it? But of course, something, allegations, we can't be sure, may have happened, perhaps misleading, etc., etc. This demonstrates to a near certainty that Kavanaugh knew about the incident weeks before the story came to light. That's because he did it, of course. That's the way people know about those things before they come to light. They were involved in them. It is possible he had somehow heard about false charges being circulated in advance, worked to refute them, and then misled the Senate about when he heard about them, which would also be problematic all by itself. But hey, who am I to judge? Haha. An alternative, more direct explanation would be that he worked to refute the charge because he knew about it from actually having done what he was accused of. There is no doubt, however, that Kavanaugh intentionally misled the Senate. In a transcribed interview with the Senate Judiciary Committee, he very clearly stated that he had no advance knowledge of Ramirez's allegations until the New Yorker's story was published. And here is, they've taken an NYC Southpaw tweet, which has a screen grab of the transcript in order to illustrate the point here. Let's see. Is this... Well, this has some interesting context, which comes up a little bit later here. Southpaw's tweet here is, in the 9:25 transcribed interview with Senate investigators, Kavanaugh unequivocally denies knowing about the Ramirez story at any time between his college graduation and when the New Yorker story was published. Here's the transcript, and I don't know who's doing the questioning here because it's redacted. The incident that she alleges in the article, was that discussed at the wedding? You'll figure out what the wedding is about in just a minute, I think. Kavanaugh answers no, because it didn't happen with me or with anyone as far as I know, but not with me. Questioner says, all right. My last question on this subject is, since you graduated from college, but before the New Yorker article publication on September 23rd, have you ever discussed or heard discussion about the incident matching the description given by Ms. Ramirez to the New Yorker? Kavanaugh says no. And now he'll say, I didn't discuss or hear it discussed because it was an email, and that's not a discussion. A discussion is a verbal exchange, and I didn't hear it because you can't hear an email, you see. Now, let's keep going here. On the other hand, as Charles Cook points out later in the interview, Kavanaugh tells the committee that he heard, quote, heard about Ramirez's charges. So that's a little bit odd, and he can't decide whether he heard about it or not. And I think that there was probably a embedded photo here, or perhaps an embedded tweet, and either the tweet's gone from Twitter or there's some sort of misprint here, but there's a big blank space, so we don't see what Charles Cook had to say on this. This answer, though, we are told, by Kavanaugh does not specifically state that he was aware of Ramirez's allegations before the article came out. Kavanaugh is merely following the cue of a friendly Republican questioner who is bringing up a party talking point that the New York Times passed up on the Ramirez story. In fact, it was simply unable to reach the source who spoke with the New Yorker. Kavanaugh then proceeds to say Ramirez was shopping around recollections of the incident to classmates, but does not clarify when this information became known to him. And then, in any case, his public statement to Hatch 2 days later, left the impression the allegations were a complete shock when they appeared in the New Yorker. Well, apparently they were not. That's what's so interesting about this, the messages and the texts and emails that were circulated in his crowd at the time. In any case, the FBI investigation is still in its early stages, although it's getting to be late. It's Tuesday and they're supposed to be done by Friday. Still in its early stages, it has now been freed from the shackles Trump had initially placed on it. By the way, there have since been doubts expressed about that, and you should always have harbored those doubts. And Kavanaugh is defending an account that does not add up. Well, that's where we were as of last night. I think that somewhere in my tweet stream here, there may have been another take available on all this, and I don't know how quickly we'll be able to turn it up. I just wanted to make sure that I had at least one available. I think the original came from NBC News, and maybe we should pick that one up too, although I do see it's an AMP version of NBC News. And here's the story about the wedding. That was not adequately explained, I don't think, in the New Yorker piece. Text messages suggest Kavanaugh wanted to refute accusers' claim before it became public. This is the NBC News report from yesterday. A former classmate of the Supreme Court nominee has reached out to the FBI but hasn't received a response. This by Heidi Prisbilla. I've never been able to pronounce that name. And Leanne Caldwell, who's got no troubles with the pronunciation of her name. I guess unless she's speaking to non-English speakers from outside the country. All right. In the days leading up to the public allegation that Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh exposed himself to a college classmate, the judge and his team were communicating behind the scenes with friends to refute the claim, according to text messages obtained by NBC News. Kerry Burcham, who was at Yale with both Kavanaugh and his accuser, Ramirez, has tried to get those messages to the FBI for its newly reopened investigation into the matter, but says she has yet to be contacted by the Bureau. The texts between Burcham and Karen Yarosavage, I'm hoping that's right, both friends of Kavanaugh, suggest that the nominee was personally talking with former classmates about Ramirez's story in advance of the New Yorker article that made her allegation public. How strange. In one message, Yarosavage said Kavanaugh asked her to go on the record in his defense. Two other messages show communication between Kavanaugh's team and former classmates in advance of the story. In now public transcripts from an interview with a Republican Judiciary Committee staff on September 25th, that's what we were reading from just a moment ago in the Southpaw tweet. Let's see. Kavanaugh claimed that it was Ramirez who was calling around to classmates trying to see if they remembered it, adding that it strikes me as, what's going on here? When someone is calling around to try to refresh other people, is that what's going on? What's going on with that? That doesn't sound good to me. Doesn't sound fair. Doesn't sound proper. It sounds like an orchestrated hit to take me out. Of course, he's doing that on the phone and an email with his friends in advance of the accusations, doing exactly what he's accusing others of. Projection, again. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Rich Radio. Just digging around here trying to see where else we might go in the next couple minutes here. But let's continue on, if I can find the page again, with the story from NBC News. Here we are, and now public transcripts that we were reading before. From an interview with the Senate Judiciary staff, he accuses basically all of his accusers of engaging in a behind-the-scenes coordination to try and gin up stories about him, which is terrible because he's busy trying to refresh the memories and gin up better stories about himself among his supporters. And isn't it awful when they do that, but awesome when I do what I do? The texts also demonstrate that Kavanaugh and Ramirez were more socially connected than previously understood, and that Ramirez was uncomfortable around Kavanaugh when they saw each other at a wedding 10 years after they graduated. I wonder why that might be. Burcham's efforts also show that some potential witnesses have been unable to get important information to the FBI. That is important, isn't it? On Monday, a senior U.S. official confirmed that the White House has authorized the FBI to expand its initially limited investigation, that's alleged anyway, by interviewing anyone it deems necessary as long as the review is finished by the end of the week. The New York Times first reported the change in scope, and thanks a lot, New York Times, because lots of other people are reporting, yeah, not so much. The scope actually hasn't changed a great deal. They just basically went ahead and said, oh yeah, you're going to be able to do whatever you want. It's a free and open investigation by the FBI, P.S. Don't you dare investigate any of these things or talk to any of these people. But other than that, it's totally free. NBC News reached out to Burcham for comment after obtaining a copy of a memo she wrote about the text messages. In a statement to NBC News, Burcham, a partner in the law firm Aiken Gump, that's a big deal, said, I understand that President Trump and the U.S. Senate have ordered an FBI investigation into certain allegations of sexual misconduct by the nominee Brett Kavanaugh. I have no direct or indirect knowledge about any of the allegations against him. However, I am in receipt of text messages from a mutual friend of both Debbie and mine that raise questions related to the allegations. I have not drawn any conclusions as to what the texts may mean or may not mean, but I do believe they merit investigation by the FBI and the Senate. On Sunday, Burcham emailed FBI agent J.C. McDonough her memo. After getting no response, she resent the summary on Monday morning, along with screenshots of certain texts that she thinks raise questions that should be investigated. I'm sure he's really busy and expect that he'll get back to me, said Burcham. Burcham's memo outlining her correspondence with Yara Savage shows there's a circle of Kavanaugh friends who may have pertinent information and evidence relevant to the inquiry who may not be interviewed. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has already set in motion a vote on Kavanaugh's nomination on the Senate floor for later this week. He insists that they're going to go through with it. The investigation is supposed to extend through the end of the week, but they are basically saying, we're going to vote before there's any conclusion to the investigation anyway. Okay, sure. Kavanaugh has strongly denied the allegation by Ramirez, as well as accusations by Christine Blasey Ford that he sexually assaulted her when the two were in high school, and by Julie Swetnick that Kavanaugh engaged in sexual misconduct at parties when he was a student at Georgetown Preparatory School in the 1980s. Burcham, 51, a graduate of Yale and a Connecticut resident, reached out to Senator Richard Blumenthal's office last week. Blumenthal, a Democrat, sits on the Judiciary Committee. We heard from Kerry late on Thursday and submitted her summary to the Judiciary Committee early Friday, a spokeswoman for Blumenthal said in a statement to NBC News. After we were made to jump through several hoops that delayed our moving forward, it became clear that the majority committee staff had not turned this summary over to the FBI and in fact had no intention of turning it over to the FBI. With our assistance, Kerry submitted her summary to the FBI herself. George Hartman, a spokesman for the Senate Judiciary Committee Chair, Charles Grassley of Iowa, said that the texts from Ms. Burcham do not appear relevant or contradictory to Judge Kavanaugh's testimony. This appears to be another last-ditch effort to derail the nomination with baseless innuendo by Democrats who have already decided to vote no, Hartman said. Of course, the person reporting it isn't going to vote on Kavanaugh's nomination at all. Burcham's texts with Yara Savage shed light on Kavanaugh's personal contact with her friends, including that he obtained a copy of a photograph of a small group of friends from Yale at a 1997 wedding in order to show himself smiling alongside Ramirez 10 years after they graduated. Both were in the wedding party. Kavanaugh was a groomsman, Ramirez a bridesmaid at the wedding. That must have been awkward. And, of course, he goes and procures the picture and says, see, I'm smiling all the way over here on this end of the lineup of, I don't know, let's say somewhere between half a dozen and 10 people. And she smiling all the way at the other end of the lineup, putting on a brave face. Again, on September 22nd, Yara Savage texted Burcham that she had shared the photo with, quote, Brett's team. But when Kavanaugh was asked about the wedding during the committee interview on September 25th, that was the reference to the wedding that we were reading about in the Jonathan Chait article that did not get adequately explained there. Here's the explanation. When Kavanaugh was asked about the wedding during the committee interview on September 25th, he said he was, quote, probably at a wedding with Ramirez. Asked if he interacted with her at the wedding, Kavanaugh replied, I am sure I saw her because it wasn't a huge wedding, but added that he, quote, doesn't have a specific recollection. Lying to Congress is a felony, whether testimony is taken under oath or not, we are reminded. And, of course, well, that's not really an accurate answer. Oh, I was probably at a wedding with her. I think I saw her. It wasn't a huge wedding. You were just complaining about people having their memories refreshed about this stuff. or about Ramirez trying to refresh memories by calling people. You just got a picture of yourself with Ramirez at the wedding. Were you two together at the wedding? Probably. Well, that's not an answer that is accurate, of course. I'll point out it's probably also not an answer that anybody's going to prosecute him for, or even cast, well, I don't know. We can't say they're not going to cast aspersions. I'm about to cast aspersions. The answer is, did you see her at a wedding? Is yes, I did, and I know this. I had some doubts a few days ago about whether or not that was the case, but I have since seen a photograph of us together at the wedding, and so I'm pretty sure. Unless the photo was photoshopped, and it's all part of the vast left-wing conspiracy to get me to frame myself somehow in all of this. But probably is not an actually truthful answer to the question if you've already seen the photograph. It's just that he knew that other people didn't yet know that he had seen the photo. Now that we all know he'd seen the photo, the answer's not truthful. But is it a lie? Is it perjury? Well, it's very probable that they were together. Now, it's just more probable than it was before we knew he saw the photo, so he may skate on that one. Burcham hired a lawyer on Sunday to help her get information into the right hands. She has twice sent her memo to the FBI and has yet to hear a response, according to her lawyer, who spoke on condition of anonymity. He flagged 2 texts in particular. Her lawyer spoke on condition of anonymity? How did that work? That is odd. Don't you think? I mean, now you're granting anonymity to people because they don't want to be known as controversial people's lawyers? Or was he not authorized to discuss this? Is that what it is? In which case, you don't want that guy as your... I mean, how many attorneys have you got? That seems pretty weird. I don't think I understand that correctly. Could that possibly be it? Burcham hired a lawyer on Sunday. She has twice sent her memo to the FBI. Has yet to hear a response, according to her lawyer, who spoke on condition of anonymity. No. That's it. That's a weird request and a weird grant of anonymity. In a series of texts before the publication of the New Yorker story, Yara Savage wrote that she had been in contact with Brett's guy, and also with Brett, and that's in quotes, and also with, quote, Brett. And is that because his name is really Bart O'Kavanaugh? What does that mean? Anyway, maybe she's not sure that she was really in contact with Brett, but with someone using his email address? That is weird. In a series of texts before the publication of the New Yorker story, Yara Savage wrote that she'd been in contact with Brett's guy and also with Brett, who wanted her to go on the record to refute Ramirez. According to Burcham, Yara Savage also told her friend that she turned over a copy of the wedding party photo to Kavanaugh, writing in a text, "I had to send it to Brett's team, too." Bob Bauer, former White House counsel for President Barack Obama, said, "It would be surprising, and it would certainly be highly imprudent, if at any point Judge Kavanaugh directly contacted an individual believed to have information about allegations like this. A nominee would normally have been counseled to leave his legal and nominations team the job of following up on any questions arising from press reports or otherwise, and doing so appropriately." Further, the texts show Kavanaugh may need to be questioned about how far back he anticipated that Ramirez would air allegations against him. Burcham says in her memo that Kavanaugh and/or his friends may have initiated an anticipatory narrative as early as July to conceal or discredit Ramirez. Kavanaugh told the Senate Judiciary Committee under oath that the first time he heard of Ramirez's allegation was in the September 23rd article in the New Yorker. Kavanaugh was then asked by Senator Orrin Hatch when he first heard of Ramirez's allegations. Kavanaugh answered in the New Yorker story. A September 24th text shows Yara Savage clarifying that she did not refute Ramirez's claims to the New Yorker. Republicans and Kavanaugh have said that his former classmates, who gave an anonymous statement to the New Yorker, have refuted Ramirez's claims. "I didn't say I would have known. I said, she never told me. I never heard a word of this ever happening and never saw it. The media surmised that I was saying she's lying, said Yara Savage. Yara Savage declined to speak to NBC News, as did other classmates named in Burcham's memo, who may have information pertinent to the investigation. Finally, Burcham is concerned about what she witnessed at the 1997 wedding where Ramirez and Kavanaugh were both in the wedding party. According to the information Burcham provided, Ramirez tried to avoid Kavanaugh at the wedding of their two friends, Yara Savage and Kevin Genda, Genda, possibly Genda. Ramirez clung to me at the wedding, Burcham wrote to Yara Savage in a September 24th text message. She never went near them. A reference to Kavanaugh and his friends. Even in the group photo, Burcham wrote, Ramirez was trying to keep away from Kavanaugh. I wonder why that might be the case. Of course, we don't wonder. We know exactly why that might be the case. She remembers very well what he did to her 10 years earlier. Okay, let's see. Other various bits of information and stories. Any more to round up about Kavanaugh? I can hardly even tell. I'm trying to keep one eye on Twitter and see whether anything new is breaking about that. But I don't think that's the case. Let's see. All right, so some other commentary along the way. Let's see. Mighty OCD guessing that back in the Chris Dudley story, the big, tall basketball player who smashed a beer glass, or rather a Collins glass, in someone else's ear because he had the temerity not to be the lead singer of UB40, apparently. If he wasn't a Deke, Mighty OCD is going to bet that he was an SAE. Well, that's slander, and SAE ought to sue you, or something like that. I don't know. I have no idea about his affiliations, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to turn anything up on that one. I couldn't guess for you. Let's see. Yes, okay. Well, I'm looking through other commentary that's coming through both in the main Twitter feed plus the KITM hashtag. We also have a couple other things here. Let's see. Karen surmising the lawyer requesting anonymity doesn't want Kavanaugh to know his role just in case his or her client has to appear, or he has a client, I guess, at any point, to appear before Kavanaugh. And I knew that was probably it, but still, it seems highly unusual. I mean, I know that's what the lawyer would wish for. I just don't know that any news outlets are obligated to provide that protection. After all, I guess if you're worried about his bias, you should come forward and report it to the FBI. I'm remaining anonymous because I fear that Kavanaugh is the kind of person who won't be able to put that sort of slight, if he would regard it as a slight, my reporting or my zealous advocacy for my client, and he would hold it against me. I mean, that's a very serious problem with judicial temperament, but of course, he or she does not want that trouble, and I guess it's hard to blame them knowing what we now know about Kavanaugh and the way he handles these things. Let's see, and just to get the facts on the record, Bill wants everybody to know that there was another account from the bar that has Kavanaugh throwing vanilla ice at the patron, which is totally plausible given all the weightlifting that he did when he was in high school. So I just wanted to let that get out there too, because it is possible that he just picked the guy up and hurled him. What, 1985? Was vanilla ice a thing? In 1985, I can't remember the exact timing. But it would be that much easier, I guess, to throw him in the face of another bar patron if he was not yet a thing. And one, he was lighter, and two, he might have gone for it at that point. When he's later rich and famous, his fee for being tossed into other people's faces was probably much higher. All right. Just sort of, I think we're wrapping everything up on Kavanaugh for the moment, unless something else breaks. I think we're caught up. Other stories which deserve attention. They really did. There were others, and they happened in the same period, and we didn't notice them because we were all tied up in this other stuff. There's more write-ups of the Kavanaugh situation, not all of which need to be entered on the record, though. These other stories, though, deserve some attention. Let's see. There's a couple. Which one will we go with first? Oh, did we keep this one back. I'll have to make sure we have... what's this? I'll have to open that one up too. Boy, there's so many things happening here. The Daily Beast seems unusually aflame in some other interesting stories here. Let's see if I can scroll back just a little bit here. I thought I saw another, and I let it go because I figured it was the same as another Daily Beast story I had already put aside, but it was not. And we're switching subjects here over to Trump and his nonsense. And I don't think I'm able to find it now as quickly as I had hoped for. Anyway, Trump has gotten himself wrapped up in another set of crazy lies. And I thought I would do you a favor and keep you up to date on them. But for some reason, let's see, I'm going to take one more stab at getting through the clutter here and trying to find what I thought I already had here. But no, not happening. Okay. However, is this one it? Yeah, here we go. Okay, now I've got them all, I think. Although it might not be Daily Beast. But let's catch up on what Trump has been up to. For one thing, there was this news that the White House had gotten itself embroiled because of Donald Trump's loose lips, I guess, and they are extraordinarily loose, gotten itself in trouble with, you'll never believe it, with women and reporters. Again, this I have from the perspective of the day after here. But what ends up happening here is President Trump is having a press conference of some kind yesterday, wide-ranging, touching on a number of topics, and he calls on ABC News reporter Cecilia Vega, who apparently is a little bit behind in standing up to ask her question. And this catches Trump's attention, and he says, "Oh, you weren't ready. You didn't think I was going to call on her." She's shocked that I would have called on her. And she apparently stands and says, "No, I wasn't." Like, "No, I'm not shocked. Thank you, Mr. President," and proceeds to ask her question. When I saw the video of it, I will agree that I heard it very much the way I think Donald Trump heard it. She says, "No, I wasn't." That is, "You were shocked that I called on you." "No, I wasn't. Thank you, Mr. President." But although I think I heard it the way he heard it, but then again, it was framed to me in the way that didn't excuse, but explained Trump's response was, it sounded apparently to Trump like she said, I called on you. You're shocked that I called on you. And it sounds like she says, "No, I wasn't thinking, Mr. President." And he says to her, "I know you're not thinking. You never do." And she says, "I'm sorry?" "No, go ahead. And gets her to move on to the question. Now, I think I heard her say, "I wasn't thinking," because I had seen, before I even rolled the video, I had seen that the report was that Trump says to a reporter, "She's not thinking." So I think I was conditioned to look for that interpretation of it. And now, of course, it turns out she says she was saying, "No, I wasn't shocked that you called on me. Thank you for calling on me, Mr. President," and goes ahead. Now, that circulated for, I don't know, about 12 hours, and everybody's saying, "Oh my God, this guy, he never stops with belittling people, and in particular, belittling women, not to mention belittling the press. A woman reporter is only going to get a double dose of this venom when he opens his mouth." But as it turns out, The White House was embarrassed by this and apparently has edited the transcript of the exchange so that it doesn't look quite as damning of him. And that's the story the Daily Beast has. After President Trump was caught on camera telling a reporter she, quote, never thinks, the White House moved to retroactively alter the president's attack at a Monday afternoon press conference by changing a word in the official transcript. While the president told ABC News reporter Cecilia Vega, "I know you're not thinking, you never do," the White House transcript reads, or remember, she says that she said, I wasn't shocked. Thank you, Mr. President. The White House now claims the president responded, "I know you're not thanking. You never do." I know now you're not thanking. No, thank you. I'm not shocked. Thank you, Mr. President. I know you never thank. You just did thank, though. But I know that you never do. Or whatever. That's a totally plausible explanation of what God said there, don't you think? While Vega did thank the president for calling on her to ask a question before Trump made the remark, his comment prompted her to ask, "I'm sorry," before the president dismissed her. "No, go ahead, the president said in response, urging her to move on and ask her question. What a very interesting exchange that was. Here's the Daily Beast's initial report on his lashing out at a female reporter. "I know you're not thinking, you never do." The president sniped at ABC reporter Cecilia Vega's intelligence during a zany presser in which he also claimed to have dirt on an unnamed Democratic senator. I think we missed that entirely. And there is, by the way, photos of Jared Kushner and others who are standing there backing up the president, laughing over his shoulder while he faces Cecilia Vega here. That must have been very interesting to stand on the other side of. And, chalk that one up to more about the way men performatively assault or otherwise degrade women for the benefit of their male admirers. President Trump's Monday morning press conference went off the rails with him berating multiple female reporters. I guess there's multiple. Claiming he has dirt on an unnamed Democratic senator and ranting about the media. The president appeared in a Rose Garden presser flanked by trade-focused staffers and cabinet members to announce his new trilateral trade agreement, at a White House press conference, boasting the agreement will turn North America into a manufacturing powerhouse, which it kind of is. But when the presser opened up for questions, the president returned to his usual combativeness with members of the media. After calling on Cecilia Vega, who paused as she stood up to ask her question, Trump decided to mock the female reporter. "She's shocked that I picked on her. She's like in a state of shock," he said, earning laughs from the crowd. "And no, I'm not. Thank you, Mr. President," the White House reporter responded. Trump, seemingly misunderstanding the female reporter, hit back again, this time directly insulting her intelligence. "That's okay. I know you're not thinking. You never do." "I'm sorry," and then the go ahead. When she asked about reports that the White House is limiting the scope of the investigation into Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, and that's how all this ties together, Trump objected, telling Vega he would prefer to discuss his trade policy first. Fair enough. This was not the first time Vega had a tense run-in with Trump. In July, Vega attempted to grill the president about whether he believes the Russian government is continuing to attempt to interfere with U.S. elections. Is Russia still targeting the U.S., Mr. President? "Thank you very much. No," Trump responded. The president responded no again before ignoring her and answering another reporter's question. Vega later confirmed on Twitter that the president was looking directly at her and had heard her questions. Following Monday morning's press conference, Vega only had one thing to say about Trump's attack on her. "A news conference means you get to ask whatever question you want to ask." Hashtag First Amendment. So I guess she was tweeting that. Elsewhere in the zany press conference, might as well take a look at this. The president shut down another female reporter for inquiring about the Kavanaugh probe before he has satisfied with the amount. What is that supposed to mean? Before he is satisfied with the amount of questions regarding his trade agreement. Okay, I guess bad proofreading on that one. "Mr. President, Now that you have answered several questions on trade, I would like to turn to Mr. Kavanaugh, CNN reporter Caitlin Collins began. She was, however, quickly interrupted by the president. Don't do that, Trump said. Do you have a question on trade? When she continued her Kavanaugh question, Trump dismissed her, adding, excuse me, don't do that, before turning to another reporter and demanding Collins yield the microphone. Like her ABC counterpart, Collins had previously drawn Trump's ire, even being disinvited and barred from attending Rose Garden event in July after asking the president a question about his former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, who was recently indicted as a result of special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. He's in the news today, too, by the way. Despite the reluctance, Trump eventually did comment on his Supreme Court nominee in response to a question from a male reporter, by divulging that he was, quote, surprised by Kavanaugh's discussion of his high school drinking habits during last week's Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. I watched a man saying that he did have difficulty as a young man with drink, Trump explained. I love the archaic expression of it. I mean, he talked about things that happened when he drinks. This is not a man that said that he was perfect with respect to alcohol. Kavanaugh denied ever having a drinking problem, saying that he merely liked beer and still likes beer. The president quickly added that while Kavanaugh might have had a problem with alcohol, he does not. In fact, Trump admitted to his aversion to liquor is one of his only good traits. Well, that's probably true. I've never had alcohol. I just, for whatever reason, he said, can you imagine if I had what a mess I'd be? I'd be the world's worst. Well, you seem to have hit the nail on the head with that one. You'd certainly be a lot worse, I would think. Despite his thoughts on Kavanaugh's drinking, the president reiterated a conservative talking point that it is very unfair to discuss his teenage habits, adding that there have been no bad reports regarding Kavanaugh for a quarter century. Following the statement and several more answered Kavanaugh questions, or other Kavanaugh questions, Collins tried again. Mr. President, just to wrap up, do you promise to release the FBI report? You know what? You've had enough. You've had enough, Trump yelled before turning to another reporter. Once again. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I could have used some longer break on that one. These Tuesdays, sometimes tough, but trying to scramble around to see, again, what else, just make sure we're not missing any comments, too, from our KITM hashtag column, if you will. All right, let's see. So, again, he, at this point, refuses to answer any more questions about Kavanaugh and says to another female reporter, another woman reporter, now you've had enough questions. Turns to another one. In a deflection from the constant questions about the Supreme Court pick, Trump dropped a bomb. Got to change the subject, right? He claimed to be aware of dirt on a Democratic senator in a somewhat compromising situation. This is still amazing that he still indulges this, even as president. I happen to know some United States senators, one who was on the other side who was pretty aggressive. I've seen that person in very bad situations, okay? I've seen that person in very, very bad situations, Trump said, somewhat compromising. And, you know, I think it's very unfair to bring up things like this, so I'll do it, I guess. The veiled threat, which was made without naming the senator or providing any evidence, came in response to a question about whether Kavanaugh should be interviewed by the FBI. When pressed about who the lawmaker is, Trump declined to answer, hinting he would save it for his memoir. I think I'll save it for a book like everybody else, Trump responded. I'm not giving it to you, because he's such a grown person. At another point, the president railed more broadly against his favorite target, the media. I think the press has treated me unbelievably unfairly, he said, adding he had hoped for more positive news after the 2016 election. They got worse. They're worse now than ever. They're loco, but that's okay. That's his other verbal crutch, but that's okay. As if anticipating the impending backlash for using the Spanish word for crazy during a press conference on the new trade deal with Mexico, the president added in Trumpian fashion, I used that word because of the fact that we made a deal with Mexico. Because he's so hilarious and totally appropriate. Okay. Well, very interesting, to say the least. Just sort of keeping up on what he's lying about in as many of the fronts as we can get a handle on. There's more too. Let's see, did I put this one away? I know that Daniel Dale was calling him out on this one too, but I don't know if I put it in my in Pocket, but I know that I have it in the Twitter feed if I scroll back far enough. The president, once again, here we are. Here's the other Daily Beast story I was looking for. Okay, let's get to that tweet. Put that one up here. And there's a video accompanying, but is there an article? No, I guess it's just a tweet. But here's the latest update on one of his favorite lies, the Daily Beast writing. It wasn't true when Trump claimed U.S. Steel was opening 6 new plants. You remember that lie, right? And Daniel Dale has been keeping track of that one along with all the other ones. And it wasn't true today, the Daily Beast continues, when he bumped that number to 8 or 9. When was this from? I don't know. Well, at any rate, here's the video of him. So now Daniel Dale also has noted that every once in a while, when he's called out on that particular lie, he increases the number. It's not exactly doubles the number, but people would still say he's doubling down by repeating the lie itself. But he makes it worse by increasing the number. And I wonder, sometimes I wonder, although I think I know the answer, what would people say, people who believe Trump, about this? I mean, have you ever asked, and I've never run into anybody who professed to believe that there were, in fact, 8 or 9 U.S. steel plants opening up thanks to his tariffs and his other taxation policies and other economic initiatives, whatever it is that he credits with opening these U.S. steel plants. I've never run into anybody who actually professed to believe it, and I don't know for sure what they would say, but don't you think you would think if they were normal people, you would be able to wake them up to this fact by saying, well, surely that would be big news in the communities where these plants opened. The sort of thing that might, in fact, have made the newspaper at some point. Can you name some significant number of these 8 or 9 plants, like what town they were in? Because I'd love to go and look at the local newspaper to find the triumphant reporting about the opening or reopening of these U.S. steel plants. That would be worth thousands of jobs, you would think, in the area. That would be big news. But for some reason, it's not being reported anywhere. Of course, that's happening because the opening of the new plants is not happening. So what is happening is the non-reporting. And then I assume that the Trump supporter at that point would turn to you and say, well, that's because the failing New York Times and the fake news and and they're suppressing the news about 9 U.S. steel plants opening up with tens of thousands of people being put to work in the steel industry simply to, get even with Trump somehow, to punish Donald Trump by not reporting this major employer had moved into the area. So I don't, I'm not sure exactly how they'd respond to it, but I would be very interested to witness what happened, I guess, although I don't think I would ever really want to spend any time talking to such a person, but I do have questions about that. All right, let's see. Other things that ought to be put on the record. Here is one that is not about Kavanaugh and not about Trump, but this one's been making the rounds for a couple of days. I grabbed a Mother Jones article here, but it looks to me like Mother Jones is saying that the story originally came from Esquire. Is that right? Do they link to it? They don't. That's odd. But I guess they do credit him, at least in print, with this. Let's take a look at this Brian Schatz piece from Mother Jones. What an explosive story about Devin Nunes's family farm means for his high-profile House race. Perhaps you've heard the story. If not, let's take a look. People want to make sure we have a congressman that is not hypocritical. That's a quote that they use as a subheader here. I suppose that's probably something Nunes once said about himself and how awfully dumb for him to have done so. Yesterday, Esquire, we are told, dropped the story. There's the link. I knew that had to be up there up front. Maybe should we take a look at this? Where do we want to go with this? Why don't we go with the original on this one? Although we should maybe check and see how huge that is. A very big story. Does the Mother Jones story summarize things a little more quickly? Yes, they do. Maybe we'll do that for that reason. Okay, so fine. Yesterday, Esquire dropped a story exposing a politically explosive secret about Representative Devin Nunes, who is, of course, representative of California, one that he and his family have been harboring for more than a decade. Oh, my. Sounds serious. Nunes' oft-repeated origin story is that he's a local boy with a first-hand understanding of the needs of his Central California district because he, like many of his constituents, is a farmer whose deep roots in the district run through his family's farm in Tulare County. This family dairy farm is routinely mentioned in interviews and profiles with Nunes. Reporters often tour the farm with him. And then they note here, parenthetically, the Wall Street Journal visited in July with a link to their piece. But Esquire's Ryan Litza, does he say Liza or Litza? I don't know. I never talked to him. Discovered the Nunes family dairy farm of political lore no longer exists, at least not in the way it's been pitched to the public. The family sold its main farm in 2006 and soon after moved its operation to Sibley, Iowa. In other words, the family farm and the long-time roots in Central California, and I understand all that. Yeah, their farm's in Iowa and has been for some time. The California farm that reporters are taken to appears to belong to his uncle. Interesting. Even as Nunes has aligned with President Donald Trump and his most controversial immigration policies, his family farm reportedly relies on, you'll never believe it, undocumented immigrants for labor. Amazing. Now, that is not terribly unusual among farmers, but it is, of course, incredibly hypocritical. And it is something that anti-immigration forces have for a long time sought to eliminate because they wanted to, and of course they approach it from, we want to eliminate the immigrants themselves. I guess we should point out that in all fairness, it's something that immigration advocates have wanted to eliminate for a long time too, in that it is disturbingly hypocritical and very troublesome for conservative establishment figures to be immigrant bashing on the one hand, and on the other hand, exploiting their cheap labor on the other. And guess what? Nunes is no different from any other. In that sense, he's no different from any other of the family farmers who he claims to represent. He's been a hypocrite on the immigration front, I guess, just like they have. So, where is the farm? The farm's district, his congressional district, is, of course, Steve King's, the noted lunatic Republican Steve King of Iowa. And he is, of course, one of Congress's most openly racist immigration opponents. Nunes and his office have not commented on this article yet. Lisa's rollicking story, maybe I should have read it, it's rollicking, describes how he was followed and monitored and his sources were harassed as he investigated Nunes. That is pretty interesting, actually. Who's best known outside his district for using his position as chair of the House Intelligence Committee to run defense for Trump, lambast the media, and hype the so-called deep state. But will an article in a glossy New York men's magazine make any difference to the voters in California's 22nd district? I don't believe so, says Marianne Hedstrom, chairman of the Tulare County Republican Party. Most people know the Nunes family history. They know his parents and his brother are no longer in Tulare County, but there are still Nunes family members who are involved in agriculture in the valley. Similarly, Fred Vanderhoof, chair of the Fresno County Republican Party Central Committee, says the piece is, quote, not a news story. Geez, what do you think? People in this area who know Devin know his family left years ago. Devin is still involved in agriculture. No, he isn't. And has relatives who farm in the area. I don't think it's a major issue. Even Andrew Jans, the 34-year-old Democratic prosecutor running against Nunes, says everyone in the district has known the family farm moved to Iowa years ago. I didn't know. I'm not in the district, but I wanted to know. However, he thinks voters will take issue with the hypocrisy he sees in the Nunes family hiring undocumented immigrants, while Nunes champions hardline anti-immigration policies. People want to make sure we have a congressman that is not hypocritical. In this circumstance, we have one who has sided with Trump on every immigration policy, including separating families and deporting undocumented immigrants, Jan said. But somehow, Devin and his family don't have a problem hiring undocumented workers. With the election a little more than a month away, says Thomas Holyoke, a political science professor at, not Mount Holyoke, but Fresno State University, most voters have made up their minds. Polls show Nunes with a comfortable lead. These revelations are unlikely to change them, he says. I don't think this is actually going to be a big deal. The dynamics of the race are pretty well set, he notes. Nunes will, quote, say this is all fake news, chalk it up as another example of the media needlessly going after him. And his supporters who are already inclined to believe that will continue to believe it. And those people who oppose him on immigration policy have already taken that position. My gut is this will not change anything. Not that it shouldn't be reported, and not that you shouldn't try to make it change such things. But, well, they may be right about that, and it might just be that people are set in their ways there and unlikely to change their minds about how to cast their vote. That wouldn't surprise anybody, I don't think. Let's see. I don't know whether it would be worth going and reading the rest of the original piece on that, although I bet that perhaps on your own time you might want to poke around in there and just see exactly how egregiously the Nunes family and supporters acted to try to prevent Ryan Lizza from uncovering the story that won't change anything. Maybe that'll tell you something about what's going on there. All right. Let's see. Several other stories, and I know there are many that we haven't gotten to yet that I thought we ought to, and some others that perhaps we should return to in order to finish covering some of the better writing about many of the various issues swirling around Kavanaugh and others. But I'm trying to see whether there's a couple of other ones that that I think we ought to at least get on the record. And scanning around, I don't know if I see anything else that absolutely must make it onto the record immediately. So perhaps we can return to some of the other themes here. I will perhaps wait until after the break to decide on whether or not to return to the Rebecca Traister piece that we started the other day, although my presumption is that the rest of you would have read the rest of it by now, just because it was pretty intriguing as we dove into it yesterday. Let's see. And a few other pieces here, though, one or two that I think would make great companion pieces to that one. This one I think looked like it really ought to be credited and on the record here for just some further context about what's really at stake in the continued, pervasive sexism and problems with sexual harassment and sexual assault in the country. Why the Kavanaugh accusations and other accusations like them are still such a big deal. I thought this would make for an interesting reading here, and I did see this one went out with a tweet yesterday. Meredith Shiner is the writer over at Think Progress who put this one together, and she tweeted it around basically saying, I broke my rule, and I guess the rule being basically talking about oneself in an article like this, but this, personal experience is the most valuable in telling a story like this. And this, again, a good indication of why all these stories matter. I mean, there are still people out there who are trying to defend Kavanaugh for partisan reasons, and that leads them to say things like, well, who cares, and what's the big deal, and it happened so many years ago. One, yes, it happened. Two, other things happened since then. Three, we're not entirely sure that he's given up this general view of how to treat women in the workplace. He says things are quite different. He says, of course, he's a father of daughters, and and that he's going to be a big mentor to women. And his mother was a judge, and that he goes out of his way to be a mentor to women in the legal profession. But then there was some doubt cast on that in terms of some allegations that he might, in fact, have some aesthetic demands that he makes of the women who he chooses to be lucky enough to receive his mentorship in the legal profession. But we're not sure how to regard all of that. Still, I thought this made for important context, again, to express the costs of these things. I know a lot of people actually make the argument, well, as long as women aren't raped, what's the problem? Even with a couple of touches here and there, even if they are inappropriate. Well, that's its own problem. But hostile work environments or even uncomfortable work situations end up costing an awful lot. When I first started reading about all of this, really, and about the performative aspects of men abusing women for the benefit of other male onlookers, and I thought about the old saw about behind every successful man, et cetera, and thinking there are so many involuntary contributors among the women out there in the workplace and elsewhere. Involuntary contributors to the social and professional advancement of men. That's an amazing hidden part of our economy, for which women, well, doubtless are not very interested in claiming any credit, but certainly don't get any. And again, successful men climbing to the top ranks in American business, government, and what have you, on the shoulders of women that they abuse to get there, whether directly and forcefully and rather horrifically with sexual attacks of some kind, or just belittling them, or doing like Trump did in his press conference yesterday, and in other places and in other settings with other men around the country. This Meredith Shiner piece here, I ran from a job over sexism. Then I realized it's everywhere. And this sounds pretty important. This is another angle on this. Think about all the things that could have been done by capable women in important jobs that weren't done because they ran away from those jobs because sexism. An important angle on all this, and I wanted to make sure that we included it. Lately, she begins, as I've searched for words to describe what it is like to be a professional woman, especially in politics, I keep coming back to PBS Frontline's documentary League of Denial on NFL football players who sustained lifelong traumatic injury just for playing the game. What a very interesting sports analogy. That was another of the rules that she claimed she broke in her tweet, by the way. Doesn't like to use sports analogies, but this is a good one. One of the key pieces of science that contributed to a breakthrough in our understanding of traumatic brain injuries suffered by players is that subconcussive hits can be as damaging to the brain as the bell-ringing, concussion-inducing tackles that first drew society's attention. This is an exceptional parallel. In other words, what appear to be minor blows can be just as damaging as knockout ones. When I think back on my professional trajectory, I can't stop replaying the moments of corrosive misogyny that have punctuated my career in journalism and later in media relations, from the sexually harassing, unwelcomed comments of male peers and superiors to the discussions and rooms I was kept out of because I am a woman. These everyday hits can feel small compared to the knockout punch of sexual assault and rape the world has been forced to confront in the Me Too era, most recently in the case of Supreme Court Justice nominee Brett Kavanaugh. But to me, and so many other women I know, the impact of everyday sexism is real, it is raw, and it has shaped who we are today. Over a week ago, the chief of staff for prominent Chicago politician Tony Preckwinkle, I Not that familiar with how prominent that person is, but interesting. Tony Preckwinkle. Okay. For whom I once worked, the chief of staff was forced to resign because of alleged inappropriate behavior, which he did not deny. 2 days later, Preckwinkle declared her candidacy for mayor, and as the current president of Cook County and head of the Democratic Party, is the presumptive favorite. I could never match the bravery of the woman or women who came forward to ensure her chief of staff would no longer have a job. To be clear, I was never physically violated or threatened at work or out of it, but this former chief of staff was dismissive and demeaning to me in ways I am sure other women would find familiar. When I first arrived for an interview with him for the county job, I was left waiting for 2 hours only to be told he had no time to speak with me. When I accepted the position, it was on the condition I would be promoted to replace a retiring staff member. The promotion was delayed indefinitely with no explanation. When I voiced countervailing opinions to his, I was shut out of conversations I should have been in, watching him walk past my door to get to my male colleague's office. And when I finally gave up and gave a full 2 weeks' notice, he confirmed receipt of my resignation letter to me, but told HR he never received it because he wanted me to stay longer. He thought that if he didn't send along my resignation, I wouldn't be able to leave. To me, he was a run-of-the-mill sexist. But as I've seen the headlines and tweets about his resignation, I've grappled internally with how, in less than a decade in professional life, I've come to this place where I've accepted that sexism is a normal consideration in the workplace. I left that government office relatively quietly because I didn't think anyone would care about my experience. Instead of trying to fight the sexism I endured, I walked away, even though I knew I was good at my job, leaving the door open for another smart, capable woman to potentially be treated the same way I was. It's an embarrassing pattern I recognize in myself because I walked away from my journalism career in Washington, D.C., too, in part because I was tired of dealing with the kind of men in politics who live there. I have wonderful memories of my time as a reporter in D.C., but I also have very specific, horrible ones, almost all of which involve Democratic men. You know, the ones that don't do this stuff, right? We have plenty of examples, of course. I remember the countless men who would tell me, like it was no big deal, that I must have been having sex to get stories. Not like it was any of their business, but because these were the kind of men I encountered, I didn't have sex for the first 4 years I lived in D.C. Now, that was an unnecessary admission, but I get what you're going at here. You wouldn't want to. Why would you want to involve yourself with these kinds of men? I can understand that. I remember the senior Democratic aide who told me he wanted to find me a boyfriend so I'd, quote, stop being so obsessed with his boss, and if I brought him 9 of my male friends, he'd pick out at least 3 who wanted to F-word me. This person worked on a presidential campaign in 2016, and I still see him on TV sometimes. That's got to be disconcerting. Another senior Democratic staffer didn't want me to break a story, so he told me I couldn't possibly have sources who knew what he knew, verbally demeaning me in a room full of people and telling me that if I reported the article, my career would be over. That is, I guess it's possible that somebody could do that to any reporter, but I note that they did not. And, of course, she punctuates it and puts all those doubts to rest in the very next sentence. He gave that same story. He gave the story to a male competitor who covered it from an angle he preferred. I've seen him on TV, too. There's more, but it doesn't matter. I reached a point where I honestly felt I was less because I was a woman. And that's sometimes what people think might be the aim of these things. I was no longer willing to tolerate that feeling and thought that if I didn't leave D.C., I'd be trapped in it. I'm not writing to ask for sympathy. I'm writing to ask men to consider how the kinds of behaviors or comments they'll likely never get fired for or possibly don't even remember could impact a woman for a long time. Good point. I'm writing to ask these men to question whether they use their publicly progressive views supporting women as cover to demean women when no one is looking. Good question, too. Always worth checking on yourself and see how you're doing with that. And I'm writing to let women know that they are not alone, that it's okay to look at the Me Too movement and feel as if you fit into the fight for equality, even if you've never been physically threatened. I hope that's the case. To remember that what appear to be minor blows can be just as damaging as knockout ones. Many people see a record number of women running for public office in 2018. That's true. And as a matter of fact, just to wind up things, let me make sure we take our break, and I'll come back and use the conclusion after this. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just wanted to make sure I didn't step on the conclusion. There's not much to it in terms of the amount of time we'll have to devote to it, but I just wanted to give her the wind-up she was looking for here. And so I'll repeat. Our author here, Meredith Shiner, concluding her piece. I'm not writing to ask for sympathy. I'm writing to ask men to consider how the kinds of behaviors or comments they'll likely never get fired for, not because they're covering up, not because people are apologizing for them, but because they don't rise to the level that we are, even now in this moment, in this Me Too moment, conditioned to think of as egregious enough to fire someone over. And I don't think we ought to. I guess my first instinct is to say, well, it's not that we ought to be firing people over more such statements. It's that the statements shouldn't be made. This is a great reminder. Check yourself about these things. And I'm trying to think. I mean, I'm sure that this must have happened. I must have done something like this somewhere along the line because it's so common, so pervasive, and it's not always. It's almost not. I would guess. I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know what's going on in other people's heads. But I am certain that there are people who don't intend these comments to be taken in a gendered context even. That it's not offered as a matter of belittling women per se, but it's still something you ought to check because really, honestly, you shouldn't necessarily be spending any of your time belittling other people at all. Although that's a major pastime for me. And I suppose if you really wanted to do the right thing, you would be sure to check yourself in belittling anyone. And that would only help you avoid doing it in a loaded, gendered context. But I'm certain, like for instance, I know, and there are places where you could defend it too. And I'm sure if you confronted people on a lot of these small bore offenses, they would try to defend and say, it has nothing to do with the gender here. It has nothing to do with that kind of issue. Like for instance, when I would say things like, oh my God, Sarah Palin is so dumb, I can't believe it. And she is. And I think everyone acknowledges it. But I have had it pointed out to me like, well, that's a particularly stinging attack to level against women in a traditionally male field. And I say to myself usually in those circumstances, well, I understand that concept. But what do we do about a person who really is XYZ, whether stupid or anything else? But I guess that's, it's correctly pointed out, I think, that this is also, at the very least, to give myself every benefit of the doubt, saying that, anyone, but even in particular Sarah Palin, is stupid. So what an idiot, etc., and to be so particularly pointed about it. That is something that is very often leveled against women for no particular reason, or even when they aren't stupid. It is something that misogynist men very often will say anyway in order to get people to think of them differently. Although I think we kind of all sort of objectively landed on, nah, she's kind of stupid. It is a good warning, and it is worth thinking about. And at the very least, it should, hopefully get you to evaluate, well, what am I doing here exactly? And you might even ask, well, who am I informing by telling anybody that I happen to think that Sarah Palin is stupid? Doesn't everybody think Sarah Palin is pretty stupid, and they've pretty much reached that conclusion already? I mean, at the very least, even if you're not aiming to make a misogynist comment here, I mean, does anybody else need any more men saying how stupid Sarah Palin is when everybody has already reached that conclusion? Like, you need to instruct other people about that? Maybe the time is over for that. I don't know. But let's continue again and give her the wind-up she's looking for here. Because, right, so I'm asking men to consider how the kinds of behaviors or comments they'll likely never get fired for, as I would never get fired for saying Sarah Palin was stupid, or possibly don't even remember, could impact a woman for a long time. I'm writing to ask these men to question whether they use their publicly progressive views supporting women as cover to demean women when no one is looking. I don't do anything when no one's looking. But okay. And I'm writing to let women know that they are not alone, that it's okay to look at the Me Too movement and feel as if you fit into the fight for equality, even if you've never been physically threatened, to remember that what appear to be minor blows can be just as damaging as knockout ones. Many people see a record number of women running for public office in 2018. But what I can't help seeing, too, is the void. The talented women who have quit politics or quit political journalism, or anything for that matter, because of toxic men and the people who enable them. Women whose contributions could have made our government, politics, and media stronger had they stayed. And I would not include Sarah Palin in that list ordinarily, but I guess you never know. That wasn't the point of the conclusion there, but an interesting one and a great addition to the terrific writing that all of this is inspiring. Not that it's been an even trade. But anyway, very interesting, and I'm glad that we have that one to add to the list. Okay, let's see. Other things that require some additional attention. We could flip back to that Rebecca Traister piece, because there's some interesting conclusion to that. I have a couple other windows open that I should check in on. And let's see if I can just make sure that we have, let's see, that's the one we covered before, is the exchange between Trump and the reporters. Let's see, other interesting stuff. Oh, yes, this was an interesting angle on the reporting on the Brett Kavanaugh bar fight story. Apparently the author, the byline author in that piece, I didn't remember to announce it, was Emily Bazelon, Bazelon. Anyone know how that's pronounced? But Bazelon. And Ben Protess on that piece. And apparently Emily Bazelon has come under some criticism for having taken on this piece, because at one point she tweeted negatively about Kavanaugh's nomination. I thought that was interesting. And for instance, NYC Southpaw commenting on someone else's comment here. Josh Holmes is the quoted tweet here. As someone who has worked with press my entire career and respects the vast majority, this kind of thing destroys my ability to tell conservatives they're not out to get you. This is outrageous. And he is quoting the tweet of Brent Scher. Brent Scher pointing out that the New York Times isn't even pretending anymore. The byline for the latest hit piece on Kavanaugh is a woman who stated her opposition to him on July 9th. Quoting here, again, the tweet from Emily Bazelon. As a Yale Law School grad and lecturer, I strongly disassociate myself from tonight's praise of Brett Kavanaugh. With respect, he's a fifth vote for a hard right turn on voting rights and so much more that will harm the democratic process and prevent a more equal society. And that tweeted alongside a screen grab of her byline on the Kavanaugh was questioned by police after bar fight in 1985 story. Well, you know, NYC Southpaw has something to say about what Josh Holmes and Brett Scher both have to say. Attacks on Emily Bazelon for openly having opinions and reporting a factual story are gross and desperate. Even reporters who don't tweet them out have opinions, and that's no scandal either. The important question for reporters and Kavanaugh alike, did they tell the truth? That's right. She likes opinions, okay? I've always liked opinions. I bet you like opinions too. Have you ever had an opinion? Well, have you? I'm just curious whether you've had an opinion, everybody. I mean, that's not what I'm saying Southpaw is saying, but he certainly could. He'd be entitled to push back in the same fashion as Kavanaugh, I guess. And, well, so far, that has not yet been done. Okay, another angle on Kavanaugh that I thought we were done with, but has actually not been expressed yet here either. Brian Beutler chiming in with yet another Mother Jones piece as the center point here. I guess quoting from some of their text, he pulled out here, to be a good judge, it's important to have the proper demeanor, to keep our emotions in check, to be calm amidst the storm, demonstrate civility, avoid any semblance of partisanship. This apparently, with several ellipses, a quote from Brett Kavanaugh. I guess that's in this Mother Jones piece here. We might as well turn to that one. Kavanaugh in 2015, a judge must keep emotions in check and not be a political partisan. Ha ha ha. David Korn reporting this one from Mother Jones. Oh, and by the way, the Supreme Court nominee said, don't be a jerk. And that ain't going to happen. We're already too late for that one. At last Thursday's historic and dramatic Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, Judge Brett Kavanaugh issued a fiery and angry response to the testimony of Christine Blasey Ford, who was accused him of sexually assaulting her more than 3 decades ago. An upset Kavanaugh, who alternated between bursts of belligerence and tear-suppressing sniffles, assailed the hearing as a calculated, orchestrated political hit. He railed against outside left-wing opposition groups and claimed this circus was a Democratic plot fueled by revenge on behalf of the Clintons, whom he investigated in the 1990s. When questioned by Democratic senators, Kavanaugh was contentious, argumentative, and combative. Kavanaugh's performance at the hearing immediately raised questions about his judicial temperament. During his first set of confirmation hearings, Kavanaugh had declared, the Supreme Court must never, never be viewed as a partisan institution. That's all part of his plan, of course. It's important that it never be viewed as a political institution so that the political people he helped place on it were above reproach and their rulings were obeyed. The Supreme Court must never, never be viewed as a partisan institution. Yet, here he was now hurling politicized vitriol. Judith Resnick, law professor at Yale, told the New York Times his remarks were partisan and not judicious. And legal experts quickly began discussing whether Kavanaugh, whose previous work for independent counsel Ken Starr and the George W. Bush administration had already cast him as one of the more partisan federal judges, could be a fair-minded and politics-free arbiter as a Supreme Court justice. Judicial temperament and its importance is a topic much discussed by legal mavens. One described it this way: judicial temperament at its best is a form of restraint that appears as an even-handedness of vision, a thoroughgoing fairness that eschews anger in favor of reason and clings to respect of all parties as an essential ingredient for the operation of justice. Certainly Kavanaugh's testimony did not meet those standards. Neither did the judicial comportment of people like Justice Scalia, or for that matter, Alito, and a few others as well. And Kavanaugh's appearance might not have met his own standards for judicial temperament. And then here, the source of the quote. In 2015, Kavanaugh gave a speech titled "The Judge as Umpire" at the Columbus law school at Catholic University. It was during this event that he now infamously said, "What happens at Georgetown Prep stays at Georgetown Prep." You might have heard that one. But later in the speech, Kavanaugh explained the importance of judicial temperament. He described the attributes required to be a good judge: to have the proper demeanor, to keep our emotions in check and be calm amidst the storm and demonstrate civility. And Kavanaugh added, "Don't be a jerk." Here's what he said. To be a good judge and a good umpire, it's important to have the proper demeanor. Really important, I think. To walk in the other's shoes, whether it be the other litigants, the litigants in this case, the other judges, to understand them, to keep our emotions in check, to be calm amidst the storm. On the bench, to put it in the vernacular, don't be a jerk. I think that's important, but not very important. To be a good umpire and a good judge, don't be a jerk. In your opinions, to demonstrate civility. I think that's important as well. To show, to help display that you are trying to make the decision impartially and dispassionately based on the law and not based on your emotions. That we're not bigger than the game. There's a danger of arrogance as for umpires and referees, but also for judges. And I would say the danger grows the more time you're on the bench. As one of my colleagues puts it, you become more like yourself, and that can be a problem. The Ford-Kavanaugh hearing was a highly charged event and a challenging moment for them both. But that afternoon, Kavanaugh did not display the qualities he cited for a good judge. Also in that 2015 speech, Kavanaugh made another key point. First and most obviously, a judge cannot be a political partisan. A jurist, he added, must avoid any semblance of partisanship. Whoops. At the hearing, Kavanaugh did not demonstrate the ability to put aside partisanship. The Kavanaugh nomination now depends on what, if anything, the new and limited FBI investigation unearths. But the questions about his judicial temperament, justifiably triggered by how he handled himself at last week's hearing, will linger and remain unresolved. We may never get to the bottom of whether or not he has a judicial temperament. All right. Let's see. Also looming out there, although unavailable to me as it has been printed in the Wall Street Journal, but much talked about. I'll give you at least the headline. Trump directed legal action to enforce Stormy Daniels' hush agreement. Stormy Daniels back in the news. President in February instructed Michael Cohen, that didn't go well, to seek a restraining order against the adult film actress. People familiar with the efforts say, and apparently he delegated this work to at least one of his sons, Eric Trump, as well. Oh, wait, look, it looks like the paywall is out of the way on this one. Let's take a look at this one. Joe Palazzolo and Michael Rothfeld. On this piece, President Trump personally directed an effort in February to stop Stormy Daniels from publicly describing an alleged sexual encounter with Mr. Trump. People familiar with the event say, is this the thing that eventually resulted in her book and accusations of his being like a mushroom to bring up an unpleasant morning image? I don't know. In a phone call, Mr. Trump instructed his then lawyer, now I guess, is he convicted of anything yet? I can't remember where he stands in all this. All right. His then lawyer, Michael Cohen, to seek a restraining order. I don't think he knows how to do that. Against the former adult film actress, whose real name is Stephanie Clifford, through a confidential arbitration proceeding, one of the people said. Trump and Cohen had learned shortly before that Ms. Clifford was considering giving a media interview about her alleged relationship with Mr. Trump, despite having signed an October 2016 non-disclosure agreement, which I think we spent most of the time in between then and now saying likely wouldn't hold up in court anyway. Mr. Trump told Mr. Cohen to coordinate the legal response with Eric Trump, one of the president's sons, and another outside lawyer who had represented Mr. Trump and the Trump Organization in other matters, the people said. Eric Trump, who is running the company with his brother in Mr. Trump's absence, yeah, right, then tasked a Trump Organization staff attorney in California with signing off on the arbitration paperwork, these people said. Direct involvement of the president and his son in the effort to silence Ms. Clifford hasn't previously been reported. The accounts of that effort recently provided to the Wall Street Journal suggest that the president's ties to his company continued into this year and contradict public statements made at the time by the Trump Organization, the White House, and Mr. Cohen. Basically, he's still running the Trump Organization. Darn. The White House referred a request for comment to the president's outside counsel. Jay Sekulow, a lawyer for Mr. Trump, declined to comment. Oh, I see. The outside counsel, and then also Jay Sekulow, who also is another of his 10,000 lawyers, said no comment. A person close to the situation said Eric Trump had acted as the president's son and not in his role as a company executive. The Trump Organization declined to comment. Lanny Davis, a lawyer for Mr. Cohen, declined to comment. In March, the Trump Organization denied any role in the arbitration, saying its lawyer assisted in her individual capacity. Oh, how interesting. At the same time, the White House issued blanket denials when asked about a hush payment to Ms. Clifford and directed questions to Mr. Cohen, who had called the deal a private transaction between himself and the former adult film star. Mr. Trump had denied any sexual encounter with Ms. Clifford. The Journal revealed on January 12th that Mr. Cohen paid Ms. Clifford $130,000 before the 2016 presidential election to keep silent about the alleged sexual encounter. In a phone call about a month later, Ms. Clifford made plans to tell her story despite the non-disclosure agreement. Mr. Trump told Mr. Cohen to enforce the contract in arbitration and indicated he would pay legal costs. I'll take care of everything. No, you won't. You'll steal it from the foundation, probably. I'll take care of everything, the president said. One of the people familiar with the conversation said. Mr. Cohen had a second phone conversation with Mr. Trump about the arbitration days later in the Manhattan office of Lawrence Rosen, the outside lawyer. That person said. At the time of the conversations, the White House and Mr. Trump were dealing with the mass shooting in Parkland, Florida, and a new round of criminal charges filed by special counsel Robert Mueller against 13 Russians accused of meddling in the 2016 election. Jill Martin, a Trump Organization lawyer, was listed as counsel on the arbitration paperwork filed in Orange County, California on February 22nd. 5 days later, an arbitrator privately issued a restraining order against Ms. Clifford, who ignored it and proceeded with her plans to publicly discuss the alleged affair. Ms. Martin was asked to sign off on the arbitration documents by Mr. Rosen, who told her the request came from Eric Trump, according to people familiar with the matter. Mr. Rosen's firm had prepared the documents for the arbitration proceeding, but an attorney licensed in California, one of the venues stipulated for resolution of any dispute under the contract, had to sign off on them while Mr. Rosen's application to participate in the matters as an out-of-state lawyer was pending, Mr. Rosen said in an interview this week. When the Journal contacted Ms. Martin and the Trump Organization in March about her involvement in the arbitration, she sought out Eric Trump for advice on how to respond, according to People. Eric Trump then approved a statement to the Journal drafted by Ms. Martin with input from Mr. Rosen and Alan Garten, the Trump Organization's chief legal officer. These people said the statement said Ms. Martin had facilitated the filing of the arbitration in her individual capacity and that the company had no involvement on the matter, except for Rosen, who's their outside counsel, and Garten, who's their in-house counsel. Ms. Martin didn't respond to a request for comment. On March 6th, Ms. Clifford sued Mr. Trump and Essential I remember these guys, Essential Consultants, LLC, the company Mr. Cohen used to pay her, in Los Angeles County Superior Court. She asked the judge to invalidate the non-disclosure agreement, saying it was contrary to public policy and unenforceable because Mr. Trump hadn't signed the document. The complaint alleged that it strains credulity to conclude that Mr. Cohen is acting on his own to enforce the non-disclosure agreement in arbitration without the express approval and knowledge of his client, Mr. Trump. At a briefing at the White House the next day, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders was asked whether Mr. Trump approved the payment to Ms. Clifford. Mr. Trump has, quote, made very well clear that none of these allegations are true, Ms. Sanders said, adding that the case has already been won in arbitration, and anything beyond that I would refer you to the president's outside counsel. An interview with Ms. Clifford aired on 60 Minutes in March, drawing more than 21 million viewers. She described some details of her alleged encounter with Trump in 2006 and said she signed the NDA with Cohen in October 2016 out of fear for the safety of her family. That's not good. In a May 3rd tweet, Mr. Trump said the NDA with Clifford was used to stop the false and extortionist accusations made by her about the affair. How are they extortionist? You already paid her. In August, Mr. Cohen, and it was your idea too, Mr. Cohen pleaded guilty to felony violations of election laws. So he's a convict. In connection with the payments to Ms. Clifford and former Playboy model Karen McDougal, who also says she had an affair with Trump that he denies. Cohen, whose sentencing is scheduled for December, said during his plea hearing in Manhattan federal court that Trump directed him to silence Clifford and coordinate a hush payment to Ms. McDougal for the principal purpose of influencing the election in 2016. Rudy Giuliani, another lawyer for Trump, said after the plea that Mr. Cohen lacked credibility and that the government's charges against Mr. Cohen contained no allegations of wrongdoing by the president. All right, I guess that brings us up to speed on what's going on there. Let's see, anything else that we think we can squeeze in before closing out for the day? I know that there is some. And let's see, this was one I dropped on Friday just to be aware and make you aware of it. But the investigation into the contributions funneled to the Trump campaign by current American citizens, Russian-born American citizens, that hasn't really blossomed just yet, though it may in the future. And then there's this one here. I guess we just have a few minutes. I would bring this one to your attention. I'm not certain where this one's going, but it brings up a company name that I am pretty sure we have called on the show before, and maybe some of the rest of you who have a better memory can find the context for this one. But I just want to throw this one out there too. Even though it's only Tuesday, we have to throw stuff like this out as though it was a Friday. This pretend billionaire threw insane parties for celebs and then vanished. A story in Vice about Joe, J-H-O, Low, L-O-W. Joe Low, I'm not certain how you would pronounce that. From hosting champagne-drenched ragers on the French Riviera, to helping arrange funding for The Wolf of Wall Street, Joe Lau, I hope, seemed to have it all until his world started falling apart. And the company name that I believe we've called before is a state-owned Malaysian investment fund known as 1MDB. Does this ring a bell for anybody? Can you figure this one out? It's an interesting start. We'll give you the opening paragraph just to tease you and put it out there. Malaysian-born Wharton grad Joe Lau was perhaps best known for his love of partying with celebrities. And who doesn't love that? Well, I don't, but, who doesn't love it? Besides you, probably, and me, and everybody we know. He was said to drop hundreds of thousands on the regular, and even millions if he was out and determined to impress a starlet like Paris Hilton, Lindsay Lohan, or Miranda Kerr. In the parlance of casino and nightclub operators, where big spenders are often referred to as whales, Lau was the biggest whale Las Vegas, Saint-Tropez, and New York had ever encountered. A mastermind behind a state-owned Malaysian investment fund known as 1MDB. The U.S. Department of Justice has claimed in a civil forfeiture action that Lau helped siphon off billions from the fund through fraudulent deals and complex money laundering. Wow, that again. Lau, who has been criminally indicted in Malaysia, has denied all allegations of wrongdoing and even set up a website to defend himself, we are informed parenthetically here. What we do know is that he and those close to him bought things like a $35 million private jet, equity in music labels like EMI, masterpieces by Jean-Michel Basquiat, Monet, and Van Gogh, and a $250 million super yacht, a penthouse in New York's Time Warner Center, and the Beverly Hills Hotel Viceroy L'Ermitage. Wow. I can't even pronounce the things that he's buying. He even appears to have helped arrange financing for Leonardo DiCaprio's The Wolf of Wall Street through Red Granite Pictures. For the kind of money Lau was throwing around, he was well past living the lifestyle of the rich and famous. At the moment when everything began falling apart, he was in talks to do some pretty big deals, including buying a stake in the fashion label Tom Ford. He was also getting closer to the halls of political power in the U.S. and becoming interested in that kind of influence globally. It's hard to imagine where he'd be now had the whole thing not come crashing down. All described in a new book called $1 Billion Whale, The Man Who Fooled Wall Street, Hollywood, and the World, written by a couple of Wall Street Journal reporters about this guy. And I am pretty sure that 1MDB thing has come up in the past in some context. We'll see whether any of you remember it, and we'll see whether it leads to anything else in the next couple of days. Much to catch up on. I am sure tomorrow, of course, we'll have Greg Dworkin with us and hopefully Joan McCarter as well. And in the meantime, time to hand the microphone over to Justice Putnam for his solo high wire act. And we'll see if we can get a bead on what he's got cooking up on this. Oh, look at this. He does remind us here. Yeah, he's got that story of Eric acting as in the capacity of Donald Trump's son and not for the Trump Organization as well. So look forward to that coming up next.
On netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, thanks for standing by in another confusing day. We are in flux here at the show, just keeping an eye on what's happening with Kavanaugh and the many fronts on which his problems continue developing. We'll be looking to see whether they move forward with the vote and whether they think they've got the votes by the end of the week. Stay tuned. We'll talk again tomorrow.